The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to John.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So are you a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. This morning is Christ the King Sunday, and some of you probably know every year at the end of the liturgical year, the last Sunday is always Christ the King Sunday, and then next Sunday we start with Advent, the first Sunday of the new liturgical year. And I think it's helpful if we know why, how did this feast of Christ the King come about? If you look at our liturgical calendar, the feasts and celebrations on our calendar often go back to the very earliest times of the church, like the Feast of St. Peter the Apostle or something like that. It goes way back. But the Feast of Christ the King was created in 1925 by the Roman Catholic Church in Italy. So that makes it probably one of the most recent feasts on our calendar. And I think it's helpful to have some context. Why do we have this new feast that was founded in 1925? But if you lived in Italy at the time, you might have a good idea. It was and not just Italy, but it was a very tumultuous time in our world. But for Italy, there was war on every front, in Africa and Greece and Europe, and things were not going well. And there was a lot of political upheaval, and there were political power grabs going on. And then, of course, the cultural changes that came with the Roaring '20s and followed by the Great Depression. Well, bear with me here. This is the time that Mussolini was rising to power. And if you know anything about Mussolini, first, for a long time, he has a lot of writings that we can refer to. And we know that he started out calling himself a nationalist, then he called himself a socialist, and finally he called himself a fascist. And we also know that he was an atheist, and he often attacked the Roman Catholic Church, the church in Italy, in his writings. And Mussolini also very early on was controlling the press and putting all kinds of propaganda out there for people to see. And as we know, he eventually joined the ranks of Hitler. And it was in 1925 that Pope Pius XI, who was a political actor as well as the head of the church, he hedged his bets with Mussolini. And he was on a political high wire as well as a spiritual high wire, trying to manage the politics of church and state. And so you got to wonder, what was Pius thinking when he created this feast day? And the political context suggests that it was an assertion of power of God over the power of the state. And in fact, today we might say he was playing the God card, because the rulers of this world do indeed have to contend with God. And in the end, Christ is king. And that was part of the message that he was sending kind of subversively out there into the world. Hopefully, he was trying to encourage the people because the things of the world looked pretty bad, but God is still our King. So that's one of the things I think is helpful to know about this feast day, to really understand what it's about. And of course, our scriptures help us to understand what kind of king Jesus was. And of course, we always turn to David, to who David was and the promises that David received from God. Jesus was like David in some ways. Like David, Jesus was anointed by God. It says that David was a man whom God exalted. And of course, Jesus was exalted as well. It says in our scriptures this morning that God spoke through David, which of course Jesus spoke for God. And God made an everlasting covenant with David, that the fruit of his line would be on the throne. You see, David prefigures Jesus as the exalted, anointed, the line of God's rule. And then, of course, the book of Revelation gives us the eschatological or end times context. We hear Jesus call himself the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And what that helps us to do is begin to step outside of the confines of time, to begin to understand who God is outside of the time that we are bound by. It's kind of hard to get your head around, but it's a mystery. And it's one of those mysteries that we need to explore over and over, again and again, all the time. This image that we have today of Christ the King, the one about to be crucified, who is already a king, an image that cannot be bound by time. If we bind it by time, it doesn't even make sense. Already a king and not yet a king. Our scriptures point us toward what will be. We know that we will be full, perfect, completed, and holy in the end. But yet we are not that yet, and we are already that. Because we live it now, we make it true. Already real and not yet real. And of course, then our gospel reading. Here we're in the middle of the Passion narrative. And it points us to the triumphal end of time, even though we live in these limits of time. And the great irony, John has irony all throughout the gospel if you look for it. This great irony, the secular authority who is a king, mocking and naming Jesus a king. The inscription over Jesus as he hung on the cross dying, "This is the King of the Jews." The Romans mocked Jesus, but the faithful saw the truth in it. And the criminal that was crucified next to Jesus, he knew the truth and said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." So what kind of king did this criminal recognize? What he saw, what he knew, was one who would conquer evil with love, one who conquered death, one who would reign in heaven. This image of a king, most recognizable as he hung on the cross through eyes of faith. And the metaphorical language describes for us a truth that can be seen by faith. Christ the King, an image that was and is to come. So there's a great paradox here, a great mystery, as I said. King on a cross. That king on a cross. That cross that is a place and a means of triumph. So we're invited today to really explore that mystery for ourselves, each one of us, to go from here wondering about what that mystery says for us as we live our lives today. To move outside and beyond our intellect. You know, sometimes we get caught up in our brains and forget to live in our hearts. And this is a mystery that invites you into your heart. The mystery that the Gospel of John draws us into. Again and again and again, John does that for us. This image inviting us to explore what it means to be a citizen of heaven, to have a king who dies on a cross. And when we want to explore a mystery, perhaps we can start just by being open, by waiting to see, by allowing ourselves to be uncertain, to be baffled, to question, to grow and to change. You see, our belief is not a static thing. It changes over time. Jesus says to Pilate, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. And everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice, the voice of the King. The Word become flesh and dwelling among us, full of grace and truth." And what did he testify to? He testified to the truth. And how did he do it? Did he preach and teach and heal? Yes, he did all those things, but mostly he went to the cross. He went to the cross to testify to the truth of love, this incredible love, this triumph of love, this end-time image of the King on the cross. And what we understand about this King more than anything else is that he is the King of love. And this is the King that we are called to follow. For the love of the world, he gave up his life. He loved first so that we could love. He conquered evil with love, and you could go on and on about what this King of love does for us and how we can choose to follow that love every day. In our collect this morning, there was that phrase that just jumped out at me. "Grant that the peoples of the earth, divided and enslaved by sin, may be freed and brought together under his most gracious rule." A most gracious rule of love. What a timely thought for us today. What an incredible request. The people divided and enslaved by sin being freed and brought together. Because we are enslaved by sin, we are divided by sin, and sometimes we choose our division and we choose our masters. And you know, it's not like it was in 1925, not even close in our world today, but our political leaders are divided and divisive, and things can appear grim for us. But if we can follow that King of love, if we can be united by that King of love, then we can overcome our divisions. Our leaders may be divided. Our leaders may be divided. But we don't need to be divided. We can choose the King of love, and that love can cast out division. We can choose to follow the King of love, and it will cast out sin. We can choose to follow the King of love, and it will cast out darkness. We can choose to follow the King of love, and it can cast out hate. We may disagree about plenty of things, but if we disagree and love at the same time, we cannot be divided. We can be united if we all follow that King of love. And that King of love will lead the way to truth. So today we come to the end of our liturgical year. And we begin a new year next Sunday, the first Sunday of Advent. And as we begin the new year, we know already, and not yet, that we will end the year in triumph, the triumph of love. We come to the beginning of the new year with assurance of victory. We will find the deepest truths if we follow that King of Love about who God is and about who we are in relationship to God. And that paradox of that already not yet, that image of the God on the cross, stretches our minds so that we can get more into them, that we can be bigger and more loving people. So today we remember Jesus' triumph over death. Even now, as we stand at the end of this liturgical year and look forward to a new year, as we begin once again with Advent, we point forward to that Word become flesh, full of grace and truth. We begin the triumphal journey once again, remembering the promise that life and love are stronger than death, and we will find ourselves here at the triumphal end of time once again. Amen.